October 17th, 2017, millions of people woke up and turned on their phones, only to see their timelines flooded with a brand new phrase carrying really, really heavy implications. #MeToo. Hello everyone, welcome to Night Owl Radio. I'm your host, Sophie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about internet activism. So, a couple of things before I start this episode. For one thing, this is my first time ever doing any sort of audio production like this, so if the volume is a little weird, or if it sounds a bit uneven, or even if my voice starts sounding like I am reading off of a script, I apologize, I am still trying to figure all of this out. Now, because we're talking about internet activism, I feel like I need to preface this with a couple of things. So, first, I'd like to just fully admit I am by absolutely no means the end-all, be-all authority on this subject, but it is one that is really, really near and dear to my heart. And most of all, I'm really intending this episode to serve as an overview of the effects and the influences of online activism. But I'm not going to be covering each and every single topic under this under this phrase in intense detail. I'd also like to preface this by saying that because I'm going to be talking about activism, I'm going to be mentioning things like sexual assault, institutionalized racism, bigotry, censorship, etc. I'm not going to be diving really deep into any of these topics. That's not what this is about. I'm not analyzing the specific causes behind activism, but they are all going to be brought up and discussed. Finally, I'm going to admit to my own bias in this one. I am a queer and white American woman, and while I did incorporate a lot of research and sources from other countries while I was gathering this information and trying to get as many perspectives on this as possible, it's inevitable that some of my own bias is going to come out throughout this podcast. Okay, now that that's over, I'd like to ask everyone a question. What even is internet activism? The #MeToo movement was originally started in 2006 on the blogging platform MySpace, which is very, very much dead now. It was created by social justice activist Tarana Burke, but the movement didn't really kick off until actress Alyssa Milano posted on her Twitter in response to the allegations against Harvey Weinstein. She said, quote, "If all of the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem." The result was an instantaneous waterfall of responses and status updates on every single social media platform across multiple countries. Pretty much overnight, the phrase Me Too not only became incorporated into American culture and rapidly gained international attention, it also joined the English lexicon as a phrase to recognize survivors of sexual harassment and assault. And while sexual assault is and has always been a very, very serious issue that people have been trying to bring awareness to, it really wasn't until the Me Too movement began that there was a massive shift in how we see, treat, and handle cases regarding sexual assault. What started as an online movement quickly became a cultural phenomenon, bringing awareness to a problem that had really yet to be understood or acknowledged to its full depths, and at the same time completely redefining the modern feminist movement in the process. Okay, so there's an anecdote about a social justice movement that started online, but you see a lot of people thinking, oh, that was a one-off thing. But internet activism isn't necessarily a new phenomenon at all, but it is definitely one that has become more and more prevalent in the past decade. Encyclopedia Britannica describes internet activism / cyberactivism / digital activism, whichever moniker you prefer, really, it doesn't really matter. It describes it as, quote, "a form of activism that uses the internet and digital media as key platforms for mass mobilization and political action." So, obviously, this description does leave some room for interpretation, but overall, I think it does a good job describing the absolute basics. The foundation of the concept of internet activism is the idea that you can use the internet to to create real change in the real world. And there are a ton of different ways that people try and achieve this goal. Some of these ways are really, really successful and ingenious, and others, well, not so much. One of the key aspects of internet activism is, as most things regarding the internet, that it depends highly on this concept of audience engagement. The goal here is to reach as many people as possible with as little effort, time, and money, while simultaneously trying to engage with audiences and make them care about specific causes. Okay, let me rephrase that because that was a little bit wordy. Remember those ASPCA commercials that they play on Sunday mornings or right before Christmas? You know, the ones where they have like the traumatized looking puppies and sad music playing in the background trying to guilt trip you into donating money? Yeah, take the same premise here, but condense it and make it faster. In a world where we're constantly having information thrown in our face faster than we can process it, having a good attention grabber that appeals to the emotional side of people is a key tactic in spreading awareness about these causes. The thing about using social media as a way to promote activist causes is that it can spread information rapidly and reach an incredibly diverse range of audiences. The most common platforms that use this specific type of activism are Instagram and Twitter, which I don't think really surprises anyone. Both of these platforms operate using an algorithm that shows people certain posts based on their likes, their dislikes, and the general amount of engagement a post has received. Here's the deal though. Following these algorithms, even negative engagement counts under the qualifier of general engagement, and it makes a post more likely to be circulated within various social and political circles online. So, when you think of internet activism, usually the first thing that's going to come to mind is like the change.org petitions and stuff that is promoted on social media. However, social media, while it's definitely one of the biggest platforms of and proponents for internet activism, it's certainly not the only way that people use the internet as a force for social justice and social change. Humans are far more creative than that. So obviously I could give examples about like I said, change.org and petitions that get passed around, or I could give give examples about mass donation campaigns, or like anonymous hacking groups that try to reveal information campaigns. But I think my favorite example of people using the internet as a force for social justice is the existence of this thing called the Uncensored Library. When you go on their website, this is what the header says. In many countries, websites, social media, and blogs are controlled by oppressive leaders. Young people in particular are forced to grow up in systems where their opinion is heavily manipulated by governmental disinformation campaigns. But even where all social media is blocked or controlled, the world's most successful computer game is still accessible. Reporters Without Borders uses this loophole to bypass internet censorship to bring back the truth. Within Minecraft. Want to talk about creativity? Want to talk about using the internet to further causes for the common good? The Uncensored Library is probably one of the best examples out there. What this library does is take journals that have been censored in various countries and puts them in the books that you can read in the video game Minecraft. Now, just to make it even better, this library is a fully constructed library in Minecraft that is actually filled with thousands of journals. And want to know the best part? It is all completely free. If you're interested in learning more about the Uncensored Library, I have put the link in the description below, and I will also be going more in depth on this in my next episode on online censorship. In 2020, we saw a continuation of the biggest civil rights movement of our time, the Black Lives Matter protests that were triggered in response to the unjust murder of George Floyd. Now, this movement happened in the middle of an international pandemic, and while, of course, there were active protests happening in person and on the ground, a fair amount of the social justice activism and information spreading was done online. Now, this means more than people just posting a picture of a black square on their Instagram with good intentions. There were mass fundraising campaigns. There was emphasis on anti-racist literature being read and dispersed amongst wide ranges of people. There were petitions to make changes to legislature. This wasn't a one-and-done post and you're all set type of movement. This was detailed, and it had an effect that was far wider than just the general concept of spreading awareness on the internet. Sadly, when it came to the in-person protests, there were multiple cases where members of the police or media were attempting to control the narrative of what was being said about the protesters. They tried really, really hard to sell this narrative of how the protesters were all violent and actively seeking to defy or even harm members of the police. The only way those away from the immediate scene knew what was happening was because the protesters were live streaming and reporting online so that the rest of the world could see the truth and not the narrative that was created in order to create dissent between the protesters and those who couldn't be there. Finally, I think this was one of the coolest things that I was able to see come out of the Black Lives Matter movement. But there were instances where people couldn't go to the protests, whether it was for safety reasons or for COVID reasons. But what they did was, it was multiple groups of people organized online and would send out messages to the protesters and give them their address and their contact information. So that way, in case the protest turned violent and people needed medical attention, they had someplace safe to go and a person who would drive them to the hospital if they needed it. For so many years, I think people made this argument about, activism versus slacktivism. And they tried to make this claim that online activist efforts were just that. These tokenized efforts with no real backing behind them. But recent years have proven that narrative to be false. Online activism efforts do have an effect that directly correlates to on-the-ground efforts. They complement each other, and by no means are exclusive the way that some people try and paint them. According to a survey done by Pew Research Center in 2020, 23% of social media users across various platforms say that social media led them to change their political, moral, or ideological views on an issue. In this survey, many of them directly cited the Black Lives Matter protests as the reason their personal views shifted. And I'm going to put the link in the description below so you can see this article for yourself. Because while 23% may not seem like a huge number, when you take into account how difficult it is to change things that are as deeply and intrinsically held as ideological beliefs, quite frankly, it's incredible that social media has the potential to change that many minds. Social justice efforts on the internet are far from useless, and their effect does cross from online into the real world, and it does genuinely create real change. However, as with any social movement, there's always dangers and the potential for things to go wrong. As I briefly touched on when I was mentioning the uncensored library, there are governmental systems that seek to control the amount of information their people have access to. For those governments, the internet is simultaneously their biggest threat and their biggest ally. The internet can, and frequently does, operate as an anonymous means of nonviolent demonstrations against oppressive uses of power. But it also has the potential to put people in danger. As we all know, nothing on the internet is ever fully gone, and it is impossible to fully distance yourself from what you do online. The internet can just as easily be used against social justice movements as it can help them. The other fact is that in countries where internet usage is heavily monitored and restricted, see, for example, China and its Great Firewall, which is also something I'm going to be covering in the next episode, it can be extraordinarily difficult to spread messages and ask for help. For example, there were cases where the Chinese government was putting Muslim citizens in what were basically concentration camps a couple of years ago. And there was really little being done by the international communities to stop it because the Chinese government was so incredibly restrictive about what information they let leave the country. There's human rights violations that happen in North Korea. There's the entire situation that was happening in Ukraine long before the Russians officially invaded it. There are algorithms on TikTok and Instagram that actively stop spreading information about protests once they start getting popular. Unfortunately, online activism work is dangerous. It's easier to surveil and can be used to collect data on people and punish them in the future. People have gone to jail just for making anti-establishment posts on the internet in a country where it was just too dangerous to say that. Just as digital activism has the ability to cause real change, it also comes with very real risks and very real dangers. Finally, I'm going to talk about something that doesn't have as much academic research behind it, but it is a trend that I've seen increase in the past few years online. What has happened recently in activist circles is that there is this narrative that follows the format of XYZ thing is happening and you're a terrible person if you don't share this post. Let me reemphasize, this is something that's more based on my personal experience with social justice efforts online, but I would say that this mindset is a derivative of the whole purity culture thing that we've been seeing resurge lately. There seems to be this idea that is frequently perpetuated by the younger members of Gen Z, and I would categorize this specific group as the ones who were still in elementary school and middle school when the Parkland shooting happened. And I have no qualms against Gen Z. I'm also a member of Gen Z, but there's this mindset that has come out of this specific age range where they seem to think that what you read and post online isn't related to your personal beliefs or a sense of justice, but is instead intringent on your inherent morality. Somehow there's this idea that what you engage with online makes you a good or a bad person. Now, I have a whole lot of opinions on the resurgence of purity culture that has been happening online, and I am absolutely certain that those beliefs are going to come out in the next few episodes I do. But what these types of posts are trying to do isn't necessarily spread social justice messages or efforts, but to trigger something that is called activist guilt, which is sort of a state of feeling overwhelmed or like your personal efforts towards a certain cause will never be enough, just because there is so much that is going wrong with the world. Now, I would say that this sort of bastardization of what social justice efforts are actually supposed to do is why we have those obnoxious social justice warrior and woke culture memes. It's because people took this idea of real social justice efforts and tried to make people feel inferior or like they were bad for somehow not knowing about these causes or not knowing to seek out information about these causes. Online activism is supposed to encourage you to educate yourself and seek out new sources of information. It's supposed to help people create change. But the people who follow this really, really specific mindset, they're the ones who will share the most posts and talk the most about activist causes. But they aren't the ones who are actually going out and reading feminist, anti-racist, or anti-establishment literature. They are using social media as their pure form of education. And they're not taking into account the history of the movements behind the ideology they supposedly support. Alright, so to wrap all of this up, internet activism is complex because people and the causes they support are complex. This is a relatively new way of bringing awareness to social justice causes, and because of that, there are always going to be people who disagree with the methodology. I mean, We still have trouble accepting different types of protests in person, and Lord knows those have been along longer than the internet has. But regardless of if you agree or disagree with the methodology, you can't ignore the fact that the internet is a phenomenal platform for spreading these messages about activist causes. It has been proven time and time again that online activism does in fact create real change. It's not something you can deny just because you might disagree with the difference between online and in-person efforts. Even if you're just typing a post or reblogging something, or retweeting something, what you promote online does have an effect and can change both minds and hearts. Finally, I'd like to leave you with something to think about next time you're online. Next time you share a post about whatever social justice cause comes across your feed, I want you to ask yourself, are you sharing this post because you genuinely believe in it, or are you sharing it because you think it's something that you have to do? I challenge you to question the reasons behind your actions, not just question your own beliefs. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Sophie Castle, and this is Night Owl Radio. I really appreciate anyone who tuned in, and especially anyone who listened to this far. Once again, this is my first time doing anything like this, so I apologize if the audio is a little bit off, or if there are times where I'm speaking too fast and it's a little bit hard to hear me. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you for my next episode.